He was soaked to the bone, cursing his luck, fixing a stranger's flat in a stormy night no one else dared to face. She vanished before he could say a word. The next morning, a black limo idled outside his rusted garage with a message that would change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind howled down the empty streets of Camden like a ghost with unfinished business. Eddie Reyes pulled the dented garage door down with a rattle that echoed against the concrete walls. It stuck halfway, like always. He kicked it once, twice, then yanked it shut with both hands, metal scraping metal until it finally clanged into place. Rain had started falling in fat, angry drops, soaking through his hoodie by the time he reached the sidewalk. He paused there, staring out at the dark sky like it owed him something. Maybe it did. Maybe it owed him 20 years of busted knuckles, rusted bolts, and broken promises. Or maybe it owed him nothing at all, just more rain, more debt, more silence. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since that half sandwich at noon. He fished through his jeans for the crumpled $5 bill he knew was there. Gas or food, not both. The neon sign above the shop buzzed and flickered before going black completely. He cursed under his breath. Another thing he couldn't afford to fix. He stood for a moment, listening to the steady drip from the awning. He didn't even know why he locked up anymore. Nobody was coming to steal anything. Hell, most of his tools were older than he was. He started walking toward the bus stop 2 blocks down, shoes squishing with every step. The streetlights blinked once, then dimmed, casting everything in a yellow, dying hue. A passing car sprayed him with a puddle, and he didn't even flinch, just kept walking, face blank, eyes forward. Tomorrow was rent. Ms. Lugin would knock at 10 a.m. sharp, her thin lips pursed, her little notebook in hand. He already knew what he'd say. I just need a few more days. He also knew she wouldn't wait. Another flash of lightning cut across the sky, and for a second, the world lit up like a photograph. Just long enough for Eddie to see his breath in the cold air. Just long enough to remember how far he hadn't come. Then the thunder cracked, and the rain came harder, and Eddie Reyes kept walking, one soaked step at a time. The storm was in full swing now, sheets of rain crashing sideways, blurring the streets like wet glass. Eddie hunched against the wind, hoodie clinging to his back, soaked straight through to his skin. He could barely see 2 feet ahead, the streetlights little more than halos in the downpour. He muttered curses into the wind, every step home feeling like a mile. The last bus had come and gone, and he'd missed it again. Halfway down Whitaker Avenue, just past the shuttered pawn shop and the boarded-up liquor store, he saw the flicker. 2 red lights blinking through the rain like a dying signal. Hazard lights. A car, dead still in the middle of the narrow street. Hazard lights clicking steadily. A rhythm that didn't care about the storm. He almost kept walking. It wasn't his problem. People broke down all the time, and he wasn't in the business of handing out free labor. Not anymore. Not after the way folks disappeared once their cars were fixed, and their wallets stayed shut. But then he saw the silhouette. A woman pacing beside the driver's door, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to disappear into her own ribs. He slowed, frowned. A car like that, black, sleek, something European, didn't belong in this part of town, not at this hour, not in this weather. She looked out of place, lost, like a ghost who hadn't realized she was dead. Eddie stepped off the sidewalk and splashed across the street, boots sucking at the pavement with every step. As he got closer, he could see her better. Tall, maybe in her 30s, hair plastered to her face, makeup running, mascara bleeding under her eyes. She turned as he approached, startled, clutching her coat tighter. "I'm not here to rob you," Eddie said, voice rough from the cold. "You broke down?" She nodded once, eyes darting to the car. "Flat tire," she said, barely audible over the rain. "No spare. No signal either." He looked down, rear tire completely shredded, rubber curled like torn skin. "Get back in the car," he said, already kneeling beside it. "You're going to freeze out here." She hesitated, staring at him like she wasn't sure if he was her rescuer or her mistake. "Go," he repeated. "Let me fix what I can." And she did. The door creaked open, and she stepped out, heels clicking against the wet asphalt like they didn't belong there. Probably cost more than Eddie made in a week, some designer brand he couldn't name, sharp and useless against the river of rain running through the street. She didn't say anything at first, just blinked at him, eyes glossy with panic and something heavier. Tears, maybe, or whatever came right before them. Eddie stood up slowly, wiping his hands on the inside of his hoodie. He hadn't touched a tire iron yet, but his palms were already trembling from the cold. "You got AAA or anything?" he asked. She shook her head. No signal. I tried. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She kept glancing down the street like someone might appear, someone worse than him. I didn't know where I was. The GPS just stopped. Eddie glanced at the car again. Definitely high-end. It gleamed even in the storm, like it wasn't used to this kind of street, like it expected valet and dry pavement. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to get a flat," he muttered, half to himself. She flinched at that, like she hadn't realized it until now. He crouched by the rear tire, eyes narrowing. The sidewall was torn clean through, metal showing in places. "No spare?" "There might be, I don't—" She paused, as if ashamed not to know. "I've never had to look." Eddie smirked without humor. "Figures." He popped the trunk, leather interior, spotless. He dug through the hidden compartment, pulling out a tiny space-saver tire that looked like it hadn't been touched since the factory sealed the car. "This'll get you to a better part of town." "Barely." She watched from a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself. Her coat, expensive and soaked, clung to her like it wanted to crawl off and find someone richer to wear it. Rain dripped from her lashes. She didn't move. "You waiting for someone?" he asked, grunting, as he loosened the lug nuts. "Number not anymore," she said quietly. Something in the way she said it made him stop, just for a second. Then he went back to work, not asking what she meant, not wanting to know. The storm kept raging, and Eddie kept working. The wrench slipped again, metal clanging against the wet pavement, knuckles scraping raw. Eddie hissed through his teeth, shaking his hand out, blood already mingling with the rain. The lug nut was rusted solid, maybe factory tight, maybe just a cruel joke from the universe. His hoodie clung to his back like a second skin, soaked heavy, dragging him down. Mud splashed as he adjusted his footing, boots sinking into the soft shoulder of the road. He grunted, putting his whole weight into the next turn. Nothing. The car didn't budge, neither did the nut. The woman sat inside now, blurred behind the foggy glass. He could see her silhouette through the windshield, arms still crossed, shoulders stiff, probably regretting ever stepping out of whatever marble palace she came from. He didn't blame her. Hell, he wasn't even sure why he'd stopped. Habit, maybe. Pride. Or maybe just the kind of stupid instinct you didn't shake, no matter how many times the world kicked your teeth in. Thunder cracked overhead like a whip. Rain hammered harder, stinging his scalp, dripping into his eyes. He wiped his face on his sleeve, leaving behind a smear of grease and rain. He tried the wrench again, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. This time it gave just a fraction, but it was enough. He cursed under his breath, then tried the next one. His fingers were numb. The tools slipped, the wheel stuck. He should have walked away, left it for someone else. Let the night eat her whole and kept going. But he couldn't. Not when she looked that lost, not when the streets were this dark. He finally pulled the last nut loose and dragged the mangled tire free, tossing it aside like it had insulted him. The spare wobbled as he bolted it in, half-size, flimsy-looking, but it would have to do. He cranked it into place with slow, aching movements, every muscle in his back screaming. By the time he stood, he was shaking, not just from the cold now, but from something deeper. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the weight of another good deed that would get him nowhere. He banged twice on her window. She rolled it down just enough. "You're good to go," he said, voice flat, "but don't drive far. That tire won't last." She looked at him, rain in her eyes, something she didn't say, hovering on her lips. He didn't wait for it. He just turned, tools in hand, and walked into the storm. The engine turned over on the second try, a low purr that sounded like money. Eddie stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans, leaving behind streaks of grease and red where his knuckles had split. His breath came in ragged clouds, steam rising off his soaked clothes like smoke from something just barely holding together. The window rolled down halfway, quiet against the roar of the storm. She leaned toward it, the glow from the dash painting her face in flickers, soft but guarded. Her makeup had melted hours ago, and her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion and something like disbelief. "Thank you," she said, voice low, almost drowned out by the wind. "I didn't think anyone would stop." He shrugged, too cold and too tired to pretend it hadn't wrecked him a little. "Yeah, well, not smart to be out here alone. Car like this makes you a target." She looked like she already knew that. Maybe she'd been one before tonight. Maybe she still was. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say more, ask his name, offer something, but the words never came. Just a pause, her lips parting slightly, then closing again. She nodded once. It was all she gave him. Then the window slid back up, sealing her in again like glass was enough to keep the world out. The headlights flared on, cutting through the rain in sharp beams. Eddie took a step back as the car eased forward, tires slick against the wet pavement. No screech, no urgency. Just a clean, silent glide into the dark. He watched the taillights shrink until they were just two red dots swallowed by the night, blinking once before turning a corner and vanishing. He stood there for a long moment, rain soaking into his skin like it had a grudge. No name, no number. Just that quiet thank you hanging in the air, as if it was meant to mean more than it did. Eddie turned, shoulders heavy, tools dragging in one hand, the other tucked into his hoodie pocket, fingers curled tight around nothing at all. And then he walked home. The apartment was colder inside than it was out. A draft snuck through the cracked kitchen window Eddie kept propped open with a broken screwdriver, the glass rattling softly in the wind. The radiator had stopped working sometime last week, coughed once, and then died like everything else in his life. He didn't bother calling the landlord. No one came out to this end of the building unless the place was on fire. Eddie peeled off his soaked hoodie, water slapping the floor. His shirt clung to him, soaked through with rain and sweat, and something sourer. He shivered hard, jaw clenched, teeth chattering loud enough to echo against the linoleum. His fingers were stiff and raw, the skin split in two places, blood crusting in the creases of his knuckles. The fridge made a low mechanical hum as he opened it, more of a habit than any real hope. There wasn't much. A half-empty bottle of hot sauce, one shriveled lime, and a plastic container with what was left of the chili he made 2 nights ago. He sniffed it. Still edible, probably. He didn't care either way. He heated it in the microwave, standing there in silence while the machine spun and sputtered. His wet socks made soft squishing noises as he shifted from one foot to the other. The warmth of the chili wasn't much, but it hit his stomach like something alive. He sat at the wobbly table, plastic fork in hand, eating slow, watching the steam rise and disappear. The rain hadn't stopped. It hammered the windows like it wanted in. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of it, everything gray and flickering. A forgotten corner of a world that moved too fast and cared too little. He kept seeing her face, pale in the lightning, mascara bleeding like war paint. That thank you in her voice, soft and unfinished. He didn't even know her name, didn't expect to. People like her didn't remember guys like him. Still, he wondered. When the bowl was empty, he rinsed it in the sink with freezing water, left it on the counter to dry. Then he sat in the dark for a long time. The hum of the fridge and the ticking pipes, the only proof the world hadn't stopped. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a pale suggestion of light slipping between the clouds, painting everything in dull, wet gray. Eddie stood at the front of the garage, coffee cup in hand, staring out across the lot like he did every morning, hoping something would look different. It never did. Same cracked asphalt, same oil stains, same rusted pickup on blocks that hadn't moved since before Christmas. The storm had passed, but it left the world soaked and miserable. Eddie felt about the same. He took a sip of the bitter coffee, burned, weak, lukewarm, perfect. That's when he saw it. At first it didn't seem real, a black limo, long and smooth as a lie, rolling up the narrow street like it didn't belong anywhere near here. It glided to a stop in front of the garage, engine whisper quiet, windows tinted so dark they looked like ink. For a second, Eddie just stared. No one in Camden drove anything like that. Hell, most of the people around here didn't even have working taillights. The driver stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit so sharp it looked surgical. Everything about him was clean, his shoes, his posture, his face. Not a speck of Camden on him. He walked with slow, deliberate steps, one hand holding a thick white envelope sealed with a gold crest Eddie didn't recognize. "You Eddie Reyes?" the man asked, voice clipped but not unkind. Eddie nodded once, unsure if he should be reaching for a wrench or running. The driver handed him the envelope with both hands like it was something sacred. "You're expected," he said. "The car will wait 15 minutes." And then, just like that, the man returned to the driver's seat and sat, engine humming low. Eddie stared at the envelope. The paper felt expensive under his fingertips, smooth and heavy. His name was written in black ink, neat and elegant. He turned it over, saw the seal again, just an embossed H surrounded by leaves. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just stood there, the garage behind him, the limo in front, and the whole world suddenly tilted sideways. Eddie peeled the envelope open slowly, careful not to tear the edge. His fingers were still stiff from the cold, nails stained with oil that no amount of scrubbing could wash out. Inside was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, heavier than it looked, like it was made for people who didn't do things with their hands. The words were printed in fine serif type, centered, spaced just right, minimal but deliberate. "Mr. Reyes, your kindness last night did not go unnoticed. I would like to thank you properly. Brunch, 11 a.m. The Langham Hotel, private dining, 42nd floor. Ask for me by name. Clara Hawthorne." Clara Hawthorne. The name hit him harder than the invitation itself. He didn't recognize it at first, but something about it had weight, like it belonged on the cover of magazines he'd never read, or at the end of press releases that made other people rich. It was too clean, too put together. It didn't belong anywhere near his garage. Eddie read the note again, slower this time. It didn't make more sense the second time through. He looked up at the limo, then back at the invitation. The paper in his hand didn't feel real. Nothing about this did. Last night he'd been on his knees in the street, covered in grease and rainwater, helping a woman who couldn't even meet his eyes. Now she wanted brunch at the Langham. He glanced at the clock inside the garage. It was just after 10. He could say no. He probably should. Whatever this was, it didn't start with a flat tire and end in a rooftop brunch. People like her didn't ask people like him to the 42nd floor of anywhere. But something in him stirred, something tired of the cold, tired of waiting for life to change on its own. His gut twisted, not from fear, from something closer to curiosity. He looked down at his hoodie, stained and damp, and muttered, "I don't even own a clean shirt." Still, he folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his back pocket. And then, before he could talk himself out of it, he climbed into the waiting limo. The inside of the limo smelled like leather and something floral, faint and expensive. Eddie sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, arms pressed to his sides like he didn't trust the cushions not to swallow him whole. The driver didn't speak, didn't look back, just pulled away from the curb with the kind of smooth control Eddie had only ever seen in movies. He hadn't meant to say yes, not really. He told himself he was just checking out the car, that he'd say thanks, but no thanks, and walk away. But then he saw his own reflection in the tinted glass, hair uncombed, face hollow, hoodie still damp from last night, and realized maybe this was the closest he'd ever get to something different. Before the limo came, he'd run up the back stairs of the apartment building 2 doors down, pounded on 3B until the door creaked open, and Arturo leaned out, half asleep, shirtless, scratching his belly. "I need a shirt," Eddie had said. Arturo blinked. "What kind of shirt?" "Something that doesn't make me look like I fix carburetors for cigarettes." 5 minutes later, Eddie walked out with a button-down 2 sizes too big, smelling faintly of cologne and fried onions. But it was clean, and that was enough. He tucked it in, kind of. Wiped the grease off his boots with a towel. He didn't own a jacket that didn't have holes. Now he sat in silence, the city blurring past. Somewhere between the scrapyards and the skyline, it hit him how far out of his world this was. He didn't know what fork went with what, hadn't eaten anything with the word brunch attached to it in his life. The last time he sat at a real table with cloth napkins, he'd been 12, and it was court-ordered. His stomach growled, loud. He hadn't eaten since that bowl of chili the night before. He looked out the window again. Downtown was getting closer. Glass buildings, polished sidewalks, people in suits and dresses, moving like they had places to be. He didn't belong here. But the limo didn't stop, and neither did he. The elevator doors opened without a sound. Eddie stepped out slowly, boots echoing against the polished marble. He'd never seen anything like this. 42 floors up, and the air didn't even smell like the city anymore. It was clean, cool, controlled, like everything up here belonged to someone who had the power to keep the world outside where it belonged. A host in a black vest waited just beyond the elevator, smiling like Eddie didn't look completely out of place in a borrowed shirt and worn boots. "Mr. Reyes?" the man asked. Eddie nodded, not trusting his voice. "Right this way." The host led him through a hushed corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city sprawled in every direction, tiny, distant, like something you could forget existed. Eddie barely noticed the other diners, polished people with soft hands and glassy eyes, too caught up in the hum of money and quiet conversation to look his way. At the far end of the room was a private section, cordoned off by sheer curtains and a low velvet rope. The host stepped aside. "She's waiting for you." Eddie ducked under the curtain. Clara Hawthorne sat alone at a table set for 2, back straight, hands resting lightly on a linen napkin. She looked different in daylight, calmer, yes, but still like she carried electricity under her skin. Her hair was swept back now, not soaked and wild like the night before. No mascara smudges this time, just clean lines, quiet elegance, and a kind of presence that made the room smaller around her. She looked up and smiled, not wide, not fake. Just a soft curve of the mouth like she already knew he'd show up. "Eddie," she said, his name smooth in her voice like she'd said it before. He cleared his throat. "You always send limos to people who change your tires?" Clara studied him for a moment, something flickering behind her eyes. "Only the ones who do it in the middle of a storm without asking for anything in return." The waiter approached, but didn't speak. She waved him off with a slight nod, never breaking eye contact with Eddie. "Sit," she said. "We have a lot to talk about." The chair was too soft. Eddie shifted in it like he didn't trust it to hold him, like something that plush had to come with strings. The table between them was set with silver and crystal, untouched. A white napkin folded like origami rested where his plate would be, and he didn't dare touch it. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to. Clara watched him from across the table, poised like a statue that had never been carved wrong in the first place. But there was warmth in her eyes now, a faint flicker of something that felt real, beneath all the polish. "I didn't bring you here to throw money at you," she said, like she could hear him thinking. "If that's what you're expecting, you're free to walk out. No hard feelings." Eddie scoffed under his breath, leaning back slightly. "Lady, you could have mailed a thank you card and been done with it." "I don't believe in thank you cards," she replied. "They're too easy, too polite." She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. No logo, just plain black leather. She slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked. "A chance?" Eddie hesitated, then opened it. Inside were blueprints, photos, a business plan neatly tabbed and printed, sketches of vintage cars restored with modern upgrades, sleek lines, electric guts, hand-stitched interiors. Something clicked in his brain as he flipped through them, a kind of deep, almost painful recognition. This was work. Real work. Beautiful, technical, obsessive. "I'm launching a new brand," she said. "Custom electric classics, limited run, high-end. But I want more than just a product. I want a story behind it. Soul. And that's not something I can find in a boardroom." Eddie closed the folder slowly, eyes narrowed. "Why me?" "Because you fixed my car when no one else would. Because you didn't ask who I was. Because you still do the kind of work most people forget how to value." He stared at her, jaw tense, every instinct in his body screaming. This was too good, too sudden, too far from the cold apartment and the rusted garage he came from. But then she said, quieter, "This isn't charity, Eddie. It's a partnership, if you want it." And just like that, the whole world tilted again. Clara's fingers brushed the rim of her untouched coffee, slow and absent. The smile she wore earlier had slipped just slightly, not gone, but quieter, dimmed. "I wasn't always the woman you met last night," she said, voice steady, but softer now. Eddie didn't say anything. He just leaned in a little, watching her like a mechanic watches an engine he's never opened before, waiting for the sound that tells him something's wrong. "I used to sleep behind a laundromat on 9th, she continued. "Not far from your garage, actually. This was years ago. I had a backpack, a cracked phone that wouldn't hold a charge, and maybe $37 to my name. Give or take a few quarters I found under vending machines." Eddie blinked. He hadn't expected that. Not from someone who sat in places like this like she was born in them. "My father had just died. I'd left school, angry at everyone, sure I was smarter than the world. And for a while, I was right." Her lips curled in something that might have been a laugh if it didn't sound so tired. "But smarts don't mean much when you're sleeping under heat vents and rationing peanut butter crackers." He looked at her now, really looked. She wore wealth like it was tailored to her, but there were cracks, faint lines at the corner of her eyes, the way her fingers tapped sometimes, like she was always waiting for something to go wrong. "What changed?" he asked. "An old woman," Clara said. "She ran a tech repair stall downtown. Gave me a job soldering busted phones. No questions, no paperwork. Paid me in cash and sandwiches. I worked for her a year before I could even afford a room with a lock on the door." She met his gaze across the table now, steady, clear. "She changed my life because she saw something useful in me, not pity, purpose. And now I do the same when I can. It's how I say thank you." The air between them tightened. Eddie didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't need to. He understood more than he wanted to admit. Clara leaned forward now, her elbows resting lightly on the linen-draped table, her posture elegant but grounded. There was no sales pitch in her voice, no buzzword-laced nonsense, just precision. Calm, confident precision. "I'm building something that doesn't exist yet," she said, "not just a product, a legacy." Eddie stared at the folder again, the sketches, the specs, the detailed timelines. Each page looked like something torn from a world he wasn't supposed to touch. Clean, ambitious, bold. It felt like someone had snuck into his head and drawn up the dreams he stopped letting himself have. "You'd be the lead fabricator," Clara continued. "Custom builds, one-off electrics that keep their soul. Old frames, modern engines, your style, your process, my capital. We start with one." "One car?" Eddie asked, voice rough. She nodded. "One car, 1 month. You build it in your garage, your way. I'll send tools, crew if you want it, whatever you need. If it runs, if it sings, we move forward. You get equity, not just a paycheck. Real ownership." He laughed once, dry. "Lady, my garage floor's got more holes than the system that put me there. Half my tools are held together with duct tape." "I know," she said, unfazed, "but the hands that fixed my tire in the dark are the same hands I want rebuilding my brand. You don't need polish, you need a shot." Eddie leaned back in the chair. The folder sat in front of him like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every part of him wanted to tell her she had the wrong guy, that he wasn't made for ventures or equity or luxury, anything, that he barely had enough gas to make it home. But then he thought of that flat tire in the rain, her heels in a puddle, her silence, and now, this. He looked at her, calm, still waiting, not pushing. "What happens if I screw it up?" he asked. Clara didn't blink. "Then you'll know you tried." He swallowed hard. The room was too quiet, the city too far away. And for the first time in a long time, Eddie Reyes didn't say no. The silence hung between them like a taut wire, humming with the weight of everything unsaid. Clara sat back, hands folded in her lap now, the moment stretched thin and deliberate. "One more thing," she said. Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Of course there is." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "The first car needs to be finished in 30 days, fully built, functional, show ready." He blinked. 30 days? That's not a build, that's a sprint on fire." Clara nodded, unapologetic. "The launch date's locked in. Investors, press, industry insiders, it's already set. The build needs to be on display at the opening gala." Eddie leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You said you wanted soul, not a rush job with a ribbon on it." "I do," she said, "and I also want pressure, purpose. You've worked with scraps and deadlines your whole life. You know how to build under fire. That's exactly what this needs." He looked away, out through the glass wall of the dining room. The skyline was distant, glowing, and untouchable. 30 days, one car, no safety net. If it failed, he'd be back where he started, maybe worse. Burned and empty, with nothing but a memory of clean white napkins and promises he couldn't live up to. "What kind of car?" he asked finally. She smiled then, like she'd been waiting for the question. "A 1968 Mustang, fastback. We found the shell already. It's in storage. Just bones and potential." Eddie swore under his breath. Of course it was a Mustang. Iconic, stubborn, temperamental. A car with a voice you had to fight for. "Everything will be delivered to your shop this afternoon," Clara said. "Tools, blueprints, resources. You don't need to say yes, but if you do, the clock starts now." He stared down at the table, at the polished silverware, the untouched water glass, the folder that still sat between them like a wager. 30 days, one shot. Build it or watch the window close forever. He didn't nod, he didn't shake her hand. He just whispered, "Shit," under his breath. And that was enough. Eddie stood in the middle of his garage like someone had dropped him into a movie set. For a second, he wasn't even sure it was his. The cracked floor had been resurfaced, fresh concrete smooth enough to skate across, gray and clean and gleaming under a row of new overhead LEDs. The buzzing fluorescents that used to hum and flicker like dying insects were gone, replaced. Every corner lit up now, no shadows to hide in. The tools were the first thing he really saw. Rows of them, perfectly aligned on matte black pegboards. Not the chipped second-hand ones he'd spent years piecing together, but brand new machines, polished, sharp-edged, powerful. Torque wrenches, diagnostic scanners, hydraulic lifts that didn't groan when you asked them to work. Everything he'd ever dreamed of having but never dared to price out. Because dreaming was dangerous when rent was late. The air smelled different too, not just oil and rust, but something sterile and clean, like possibility. He walked slowly past the workbench, His old stool was still there somehow, still squeaked when he put his hand on it, like a reminder that this was still his place, that they hadn't scrubbed him out along with the grime. In the center of the bay sat the Mustang chassis, black primer, no engine, no guts, just the shell, a ghost waiting to be rebuilt. And next to it, stacked crates, labeled parts, a sealed engine under plastic wrap with a Hawthorne Industries logo stamped on the corner. He let out a low breath, ran his fingers across the hood. Cold metal, smooth. This wasn't a test anymore. It was real. Someone had bet actual money, serious money, that he could pull this off. And worse, she'd done it without asking if he even knew how to live without the struggle, without the noise of broken tools and borrowed time. He looked around again, lights humming above him, the ghost of himself still lingering in the corners. Then he rolled up his sleeves, grabbed a ratchet, and got to work. If the clock had started, then he wasn't going to waste another second. The hum of the overhead lights filled the silence like a quiet accusation. Eddie stood over the stripped Mustang, socket wrench hanging from his hand, sweat beading on his forehead, though the air was cool. The new tools glinted back at him from the walls, clean, untouched, expensive, like they were waiting to be disappointed. He tightened a bolt on the engine mount, heard the satisfying click, and still felt nothing. No spark of confidence, no rush of momentum, just that old gnawing silence inside his chest, whispering what it always did. You're not supposed to be here. He tried to shake it off, moved to the transmission housing, fingers working with practiced rhythm. But the feeling clung to him like oil under his nails, thick, dark, hard to scrub away. These weren't the busted Civics and rust-bitten pickups he was used to. This was precision, craftsmanship, spotlight ready. He wasn't building a car for a neighbor on a budget. He was building a showcase for a billionaire with a vision. A woman who walked through marble lobbies and sent limos like texts. A woman who, for some unfathomable reason, thought he belonged in that world. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she'd confused desperation for brilliance. The torque wrench slipped. His hand slammed against the block with a sharp thud. He hissed, pulling back, blood rising to the surface. He didn't even curse, just stood there, staring at his hand like it had betrayed him. He sat down hard on the old stool. It creaked under him, the only sound in the whole place that felt familiar. The Mustang's frame loomed ahead, beautiful and hollow, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He'd never finished high school, never had a resume, never shook hands in boardrooms or talked shop with investors. He fixed what was broken. He made do. That's all he knew. Now he was supposed to build a masterpiece? He wiped his hand on a rag and stared at the car. His heart pounded in his ears. Every tick of the clock felt like judgment. But still, he didn't walk away, because deep down, beneath the doubt, something refused to quit. Even if he didn't believe in himself yet, the work had already begun. By the end of the first week, word had spread, not because Eddie said anything, he hadn't, but because people noticed. The new garage door gleamed in the sunlight. The hum of power tools spilled into the alley like music. And then there was the car itself, visible through the windows, half-built but already gleaming with promise. Something was happening at Reyes Auto, and Camden was too small a place for secrets like that. They started showing up in ones and twos. First was Javi from the bodega on 9th, pretending he was just dropping off snacks, but staying too long, asking too many questions. Then came Ray, an old mechanic Eddie used to work with, who hadn't stopped by in over a year. "Looks like you finally hit a lottery ticket," Ray said, eyeing the lift like it had fallen from the heavens. Eddie didn't answer, just kept working, sweat dripping from his brow, wrench in hand. By the third day, Arturo came by in his house slippers, leaned on the garage door like he owned it. "People say Hawthorne's funding this?" he asked. "That Hawthorne?" Eddie gave a tight nod. "That's the deal." Arturo let out a low whistle. "Damn, man, that's something." But not everyone was impressed. Later that week, a guy named Nick pulled up in a beat-up truck and stepped out like he was still owed something. They used to share shifts back in a body shop that didn't pay overtime and always cut corners. Nick had been bitter then, still was. "So what, you some kind of celebrity now?" Nick asked, arms crossed, eyes sharp with envy. Eddie didn't look up from the chassis. "I'm working." "That's what this is? Work? Man, you used to patch radiators with duct tape. Now you're in here playing mad scientist with rich people toys." Eddie finally looked up, calm, focused. "Still patching things, just better tools now." Nick laughed without humor, turned, and left without another word. But others stayed, watched, helped. One kid even asked if Eddie needed an apprentice. The street was watching, some waiting for him to rise, others hoping he'd fall. Either way, Eddie kept turning the wrench. Clara started showing up at odd hours, never unannounced, always with a text or a driver giving a heads up, but never predictable either. Sometimes early morning with coffee, sometimes late evening with takeout and silence. She didn't hover, didn't interrupt the work. She just watched, asked questions now and then, not like an investor checking in, but like someone who actually wanted to understand. One night the storm had rolled in again, gentler this time, more drizzle than thunder, and she showed up with a bag of vinyl records tucked under her arm. "You have a record player in here?" she asked. Eddie looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. His hands were black with grease, and there was a smear of oil across his cheek he hadn't noticed. He nodded toward the back office. "Picked one up at a yard sale. Doesn't skip if you put a wrench on top of the lid." She laughed, a real one this time, low and warm. They spent the next hour flipping through records, him with one ear still tuned to the Mustang, her sitting cross-legged on a stool like she'd always belonged there. She played Otis Redding. He countered with The Clash. Somehow they met in the middle at Bowie. The nights like that started adding up. So did the conversations. She told him about her mother, a ghost of a woman who lived on prescriptions and wine, always in the next room but never truly there. He told her about his brother, who used to fix bikes with him until the drugs pulled him under and didn't let go. They talked about engines, about how beauty was always hidden in function. They talked about how some families fall apart not because of one big explosion, but because no one knew how to fix the slow leaks. One night she stayed past midnight, and they shared a thermos of burnt coffee while watching the taillights of a city that never cared about either of them. Until now. Clara didn't ask for progress reports. She asked how the build felt. And Eddie, for the first time in a long time, started answering honestly. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. It was a Friday night when Eddie noticed something off. He'd stayed late, music low, the garage washed in warm light, the Mustang's frame catching reflections like a mirror. Everything was humming. He'd just installed the custom steering rack, torque levels were spot on, and the finish on the carbon fiber hood had finally cured just right. Then he heard it, a sound he hadn't made. It was faint, not metal on metal, not a tool falling, more like the quiet click of a door that hadn't shut right. He walked to the side entrance, heart beating a little faster now. The door was closed, but not latched, locked every night, always. Eddie pushed it open slowly, stepped into the alley. Nothing. The night was still, but something prickled at the base of his neck. A feeling he hadn't had in years, back when tools went missing from shared shops and jobs, got underbid by snakes who smiled too easy. He went back inside, checked everything. At first glance, nothing seemed touched. But when he got to the Mustang's undercarriage, crouched low, flashlight in hand, he froze. The wiring on the battery lines was cut, clean and deliberate, not torn, not an accident. His stomach dropped. And next to the rear wheel well, a small pile of metal shavings that hadn't been there yesterday. He followed the trail with his eyes, straight to the brake line. Somebody had started to file it down, slow enough not to draw attention, careful enough to make it look like wear. It wouldn't fail immediately, but when it did, it'd be catastrophic. Eddie stood slowly, breath coming hard. His fists clenched before he even realized it. Only one name came to mind. Nick. Same lazy swagger, same bitter streak, still working in that dusty shop across town, still resentful of anything that looked like progress. The deadline was less than 2 weeks out. He didn't have time for this. Didn't have time to rage or call in favors. Every second mattered now. He resecured the wiring, replaced the brake line, stayed until sunrise checking every inch of the build. There was no room for failure, not now. Not when the world was finally watching. The garage smelled like burnt metal and adrenaline. Eddie paced across the floor, grease-streaked and sweating, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The Mustang sat in the middle of it all, silent, gleaming, and gutted, like it had swallowed all his hours, all his pride, and still wasn't enough. Clara stood near the open bay door, hands by her sides, calm in a way that made him angrier. She always looked composed, untouchable, but tonight he needed her to break too. "They got into my shop," Eddie snapped, "cut the brake lines, hacked the wiring. You think that happens by accident?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "No, I don't." He turned, pointed a stained finger at her. "Then how the hell do you explain it? You bring cameras, investors, new tools, and then suddenly people know when I'm not here? That door doesn't stay open unless someone wants it open." "You think I planned this?" she asked, voice colder now. Eddie barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "You needed a story, didn't you? Some rags-to-riches miracle for your launch? Poor guy from Camden makes good. But if I crash and burn, it's a better headline." Clara stepped forward, jaw tightening. "You think I dragged you into this just to watch you fail?" "I think I was just a good narrative," he shouted, fists clenched. "Something shiny for your investors to clap at while you pretend you're saving people?" The words echoed, too loud, too much. She stared at him, silent for a moment, hurt creeping in behind her eyes, slow and real. "I believed in you, Eddie, before anyone else did." "Yeah," he said, voice cracking. "Well, now I don't even believe in me." Something in her broke, but she didn't let it show. She just nodded once, like something final had been decided. "Then maybe we're done here," she said softly. She turned and walked out without another word, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. The bay door rolled shut behind her, and for the first time in weeks, the garage felt like it used to, empty, echoing, cold. And Eddie just stood there, breathing hard, alone with the mess he'd made. It was nearly midnight when Eddie found the letter. He wasn't looking for it. He'd been digging through the Mustang's glove box for a small fuse he thought he'd misplaced. Hands still trembling from hours of work, brain too tired to think straight. The shop was silent except for the occasional groan of metal cooling and the low hum of the overhead lights. The envelope was tucked behind the manual, folded flat, no name on the outside. Just cream-colored paper, edges crisp, untouched by time or dust. He stared at it for a long second, heart pounding like it knew what was inside. When he opened it, her handwriting hit him first, precise, sharp, but with a subtle curve to the letters. It felt like her voice. Eddie Dash. "If you're reading this, you've probably already convinced yourself I don't care, that I used you, that this whole thing was some rich woman's experiment. I get it. I think the same thing if I were in your boots. But that's not the truth, not even close. I didn't find you by accident. After that night, the rain, the tire, I did what I was trained to do. I looked you up. I found the shop, the name, the old news stories about your brother, the bankruptcy filings, the code violations you still managed to work through. I read every one of them. And still, I wanted to know what made you stop. In the middle of a storm, when you had nothing to gain, it wasn't just the way you fixed the car. It was the way you looked at the problem, like it wasn't going to beat you, even though you were freezing, soaked, and probably late getting home. That's the guy I believed in. Not because of where you've been, but because of who you are when it's just you and the broken thing in front of you. You make things whole, Eddie. Not everyone can. Not everyone wants to. If you're done with me, I'll respect that. But don't be done with the work. Not yet." Clara. His hands trembled. The paper crackled in his grip. He leaned back in the Mustang's seat and exhaled slowly, like maybe he could finally breathe again. The shop was dead quiet, except for the low whir of a polishing tool in Eddie's grip and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Outside, the city pulsed on like nothing had happened, like no cars had been sabotaged, no shouting matches had cracked open something fragile. But inside the garage, it was just him and the Mustang. And for the first time since Clara left, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt earned. The letter still sat on the workbench, edges curled slightly where he'd held it too tight. He hadn't reread it, didn't need to. Every word was burned into his ribs now. He didn't call her, didn't text, didn't ask her to come back, but he kept working, because she was right, he wasn't done. He tore the car down again piece by piece, rechecked every wire, every hose, every bolt that had ever passed through someone else's hands. He didn't trust anything he hadn't laid eyes on himself. The sabotage had shaken him, but the fear didn't control him anymore, not now. His fingers blistered from late nights, palms calloused from torquing the same bolts 3 times over. He'd sleep for 2 hours in the back office with the light still on, engine oil under his fingernails, dreams full of blueprints and throttle curves. Then he'd get up and start again. The new custom steering column arrived in a crate the size of a coffin. He opened it alone, installed it with hands steadier than they had any right to be. When the new engine block came, he lifted it himself inch by inch onto the cradle, jaw clenched, back burning, breath ragged, no crew, no help. He rewrapped the wiring harness by hand, rethreaded the brake lines, sanded and painted the hood in the dead of night with nothing but a heat lamp and a fan humming like a heartbeat behind him. He talked to the car sometimes, not loud, not out of madness, just the way you talk to something you're trying to resurrect, like a prayer in grease and grit. And when the engine finally turned over just once, clean and low like a promise, Eddie didn't cheer. He just nodded and got back to work. The lights in the expo hall were blinding, not warm like sunlight, but sterile and sharp, designed to show off glass and chrome, to make everything glitter whether it deserved to or not. Rows of tech startups and luxury brands lined the walls like they were competing for oxygen. Waiters moved like ghosts with champagne trays. Investors in tailored suits murmured into phones or nodded at names that could move millions with a word. And in the middle of it all, under a silk cover on a polished platform, sat Eddie's car. He stood off to the side, near one of the service entrances, hands jammed into the pockets of a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit right across the shoulders. His boots were scuffed. He hadn't shaved. A security guy had almost turned him away until Clara showed up and said simply, "He's the reason we're here." She hadn't said more than that. No apology. No awkward recap of the fight. Just those 7 words, and then she disappeared into a crowd of flashing cameras. The room pulsed with anticipation. Eddie's stomach twisted. His hands itched like they did right before a big job, when the margin of error was razor thin and every eye in the shop was waiting to see if you'd screw it up. A spotlight flared on. Clara stepped up to the mic, graceful as ever, dressed in a tailored white suit that made her look like a general preparing for war. "This isn't just a car," she said. "It's proof of what happens when forgotten hands are given the tools to remember what they're capable of." The cover dropped. Gasps rippled through the room. There it was, glossy black, chrome trim shining like a blade. The 1968 Mustang Fastback, reborn, sleek lines, low stance, clean electric hum ready to purr at the touch of a pedal. But it still looked like what it was, a machine built by someone who loved the grit of it. People surged forward, murmuring, taking photos. Cameras clicked like rain on a metal roof. Eddie didn't move, didn't smile. But he felt something shift deep in his chest, like maybe, just maybe, this was where he belonged. The first time the engine roared, it cut through the noise like a thunderclap, clean, deep, not loud for the sake of it, but commanding. It wasn't the angry snarl of a gas guzzler or the sterile hum of some showroom EV. It was a voice, alive, sharp, controlled. Like the car knew it had something to prove. People turned instantly. The crowd that had been murmuring, distracted, scrolling through their phones, they froze. Heads whipped toward the stage. Someone near the front actually let out a stunned, "Holy shit." Clara didn't speak. She didn't have to. The car did the talking. Flashes popped. Phones came up like a tide. Every angle was captured. Those razor lines across the hood, the hand-stitched leather seats, the digital dash nested inside the old analog casing, like the past and future, had finally shaken hands. The chrome rims gleamed like they were lit from within. An older man in a navy suit whispered something to his assistant. Eddie didn't hear it, but the nod and the phone call that followed told him everything he needed to know. People weren't just impressed, they were buying in. Still, Eddie didn't move. He stood halfway behind one of the curtain pillars, shoulders hunched like he was expecting someone to tap him on the shoulder and say this whole thing had been a mistake, that the applause wasn't for him, that someone else had built that car, someone with a clean record, a proper degree, hands that hadn't been cracked and bruised and doubted his entire life. Then he heard it, real applause, not polite, not staged, clapping, cheering. Clara looked over, and for a second, their eyes met through the chaos. She gave him the smallest nod, nothing performative, just quiet confirmation, "You did this." Eddie's throat tightened. He stepped forward just enough that the light caught the side of his face. A couple people turned. One woman clapped louder, but Eddie didn't wave, didn't speak. He just looked at the car, and for the first time, he let himself feel it. Not disbelief, but pride. The lights dimmed slightly as the last of the engine's hum faded, but the buzz in the room only grew louder. Eddie stood frozen beside the stage, half in shadow, the Mustang gleaming under the spotlight like a crown jewel pulled from the ruins. Camera crews moved like sharks, circling the car, people talking over each other, all trying to claim a piece of the moment. He didn't hear her footsteps. He just felt her, like a shift in the air, the kind that comes right before something important happens. Then, there she was. Clara emerged from the crowd in a soft, deliberate stride, her white suit almost glowing against the sea of muted tuxedos and black dresses. Her hair was pulled back again, just like it had been that first day in the penthouse, but her eyes, they weren't guarded anymore. There was something in them now, open, clear, maybe even proud. She walked past a couple of executives who tried to catch her arm, past a reporter holding out a mic, past a man from a venture firm she'd turned down 3 times. All of them faded into background noise. She walked straight to him. Eddie didn't say a word. His jaw was tight, his fingers twitching at his sides like they weren't sure whether to clench or open. Clara stopped just close enough that he could see the corner of her smile tug up. No fanfare, no announcement, just her. "You really thought I left," she said softly, barely audible over the chaos. "You stopped showing up," he muttered. "I never stopped watching." She reached into her pocket and handed him a black key fob. The Mustang's emblem was etched in silver across the front. "It's yours," she said. "You built it. You brought it back to life." Eddie looked down at the key, then back at her. "I thought this was a one-shot deal." "It was," she said, eyes locked on his, "and you hit it dead center." The applause started up again behind them, but for a second it all fell away. Just Eddie, Clara, and the car that made them believe again. They stood near the edge of the expo floor now, the noise a soft roar behind them, conversations about specs, numbers, potential units. The Mustang was still the centerpiece, but Eddie wasn't looking at it anymore. His eyes were on Clara, and hers were locked right back. He had the key fob in his hand, fingers curled tight around it like it might disappear if he let go. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I want you to run the division," she said. Eddie blinked. "What?" "The custom automotive branch, Hawthorne Heritage." Her tone didn't waver, not once. "You design it, you build it, you hire who you trust, and we grow it from the ground up, one car at a time. Eddie shook his head, stunned. You want me running it? You already are, she said. You just don't see it yet. He stepped back, heart thudding hard in his chest. Clara, I don't... Look, I fix things. I work with my hands. I don't know anything about... Management? Meetings? Corporate politics? She interrupted gently. Neither did I when I started. You learn. He let out a breath, sharp and anxious. I'm not polished. I'm not the guy in the blazer with the clean hands and the smooth pitch. She smiled. Good. We've got plenty of those. What we don't have is you. Eddie looked past her for a second, toward the crowd circling his car, toward people asking questions about horsepower and build quality and custom options like he was some kind of authority, like he was someone. I don't want to wear a suit, he muttered. You won't have to. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. She held out her hand, not a contract, not a piece of paper, just her hand, no pressure, just possibility. And Eddie, grease under his nails, and disbelief still settling in his chest, slowly reached out and took it. Maybe it was time to stop fixing other people's broken things. Maybe it was time to build something of his own. The garage looked almost the same from the outside. Same brick, same old rusted sign that read Reyes Auto, though now it had a sleeker metal plate beneath it, smaller, cleaner, a division of Hawthorne heritage. Eddie had insisted they leave the original sign alone. He said it had character. Truth was, it reminded him of the days when the only thing he owned was a socket wrench and a stubborn streak. Inside, though, everything had changed. The lifts were new, the floors spotless. The back office had been expanded into a conference room with a glass wall, but the toolboxes, his old red ones, still sat by the main bay door. Refurbished, not replaced. He didn't believe in scrapping what still had use. Eddie walked the floor in work boots and a tailored blazer he swore he'd only wear once a week. His hands were still rough, though cleaner now. He liked the feel of oil on his skin, but today was paperwork, not engine blocks. Arturo was the first to join, cracking jokes as he unpacked crates of custom parts like he was born for it. Javi left the bodega part-time to handle shop logistics. No one knew numbers better than a guy who ran a corner store during inflation. Even Ray came back, a little slower now, but with the same sharp instincts when it came to brake systems. People started dropping resumes off like they were auditioning for something bigger than a paycheck. Some were fresh out of trade school, some were just looking for a second chance. Eddie made time for each one. The neighborhood changed with the garage. Kids who used to treat the place like a shortcut started hanging around just to watch. Eddie built a little tool bench in the back corner, smaller wrenches, rubber mallets, stripped-down parts for anyone curious enough to learn. He wasn't just building cars now. He was building something else entirely. And some days, when the sun hit the windows just right and the hum of the shop filled the air like music, Eddie Reyes stood at the center of it all, not as a mechanic, but as a man who finally knew what it meant to lead. The rain came down hard, thick and relentless, washing the city in silver and shadow. It tapped against the blacked-out windows of the limo like impatient fingers. Inside, Eddie sat in the back seat, blazer slung over his shoulder, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His phone buzzed beside him. Another meeting, another investor dinner he wasn't late for, but wasn't eager to attend either. He looked out the window, tired but wired in that strange way success tends to feel. Like you're moving faster than your own life, trying to catch up to what you've become. Then he saw her. Just a figure at first. A car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking into the downpour like a distress signal. A woman standing beside it, soaked through, trying to shield her phone with her coat. It wasn't working. Not the coat, not the phone, not her attempt to stay calm. "Pull over," Eddie said. The driver looked back in the mirror. "Sir? Pull. Over." The limo slowed, tires gliding across the wet asphalt with practiced grace. Eddie was already reaching for the umbrella in the door pocket, but halfway out he left it behind. He stepped into the rain like he didn't care anymore, that it soaked through his shirt in seconds. The woman turned when she heard his boots splash beside her. She was young, nervous. One of her heels was broken, makeup smeared under her eyes. Her car was newer, sure, but the panic on her face was old, familiar. "Flat?" Eddie asked. She blinked at him. "Yeah, I can't get the jack to work and my phone's—" "It's all right," he said, already crouching down. "I've got it." She hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He gave her a small, crooked smile as he popped the trunk on her car and reached for the spare. "Because once, someone didn't drive past me either." The rain poured down, washing the road clean, and Eddie Reyes, once a man stuck in the storm, went to work again, quiet and sure. Full circle. Same rain, same road. Only this time he was the one who'd already made it through.